Hey everybody, welcome back to Dad's Guide to the Galaxy, where fatherhood meets knowledge. We're going to explore the universe one video at a time, and today I wanted to talk about something a little bit interesting, so let's get started. Okay, so everyone knows that here at Dad's Guide to the Galaxy, knowledge is one of those things that we really focus on. We want to show that there's information out there and you need to be informed and you need to experience this information firsthand and gain a better perspective and comprehension of what's available. But there are some that I've seen who mistake knowledge for intelligence. And I know people who can be intelligent but aren't very smart. So I know it sounds confusing, and we're going to break it down a little bit. But I was sent something by someone, and I thought it was pretty cool, and I wanted to share because there was a professor over at MIT who created an IQ test that broke down whether or not they could determine if somebody had intelligence in 3 simple questions. Now, I know what you're thinking: 3 questions. Yeah, right. How can they do that? Well, when you take information in, you're not just looking at it for face value, but you're looking at it based off of how you interpret it, right? And if somebody says something to you, understanding what the words are will understand how they're being used. And then, of course, knowing that person gives you information that you can take advantage of to break down what their understanding of that knowledge or word is, or that information. And so there are some things that, we look at. And I don't know if you can hear the kids in the background. So yeah, they're all yelling, dogs are barking, having fun. But I think that so knowledge is something we gather, and information we gather and retain. Our IQ is a generic interpretation of what information we understand. And so we could get information from different sources and believe them at different levels. We could interpret them in different ways, and that changes our understanding of that knowledge and how we use it. We're also taught young to build upon it, those learning skills, right? So when you're going to school, and I know everyone can relate to this, your earlier years, even in high school, college, whatever it may be, you're frustrated because you're like, what am I ever going to learn and use any of this stuff? Why am I being taught calculus? Why am I being taught world history? Why am I being taught trigonometry? There's a reason, and you go through these classes to get a better understanding of how your brain works and what you need to do to gather that information, put it together, and interpret it. So this IQ test is actually kind of cool because it does take 3 questions, and these 3 questions are pretty straightforward on the surface. But when you look at them, they're not so much. Okay, so we're going to jump right in, and I'm going to show you this site here, or the questions, I should say. I'm actually not going to show you the site because I haven't really vetted it, and I don't really know what else is on there. So we're going to try to keep it as simple as possible. But again, I thought it was pretty interesting. So the first question that you see here is a bat and a ball cost $1.10. In total, we're going to use U.S. currency because I'm not very familiar with how to break down pence or what the conversion to U.S. is, nor do I want to take the time to actually go do that. So we're going to take it for face value. Equations are somewhat slightly different, but you get the drift. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? So it's pretty straightforward. And looking at that one, most people are like, well, the ball's going to cost 10 cents because if the bat costs $1 more than the ball, then that leaves you 10, right? Number 2 is if it takes 5 machines 5 minutes to make 5 widgets, how long would it take 100 machines to make 100 widgets? So, most people use the rule of assumption or continuation, which basically means that if it takes 5 machines 5 minutes to make 5, then it would take 100 machines 100 minutes to make 100 widgets. And again, I kind of jumped the gun. I know you have your opportunity to think of it yourself, but just keep that in mind. And then the third question is, in a lake, there's a patch of lily pads. Every day, the patch doubles in size. If it takes 48 days for the patch to cover the entire lake, how long would it take for the patch to cover half the lake? Now, most and I've asked probably about a good 20 people this question already. And they jump to that and they say, oh, it's going to take 24. And if that was the case, you'd be like, oh, it's 10 cents, 100 minutes, 24. Those are pretty standard answers. They're actually all wrong. When you look at it, let's look at the first one here, right? So the ball would actually cost 5 cents. And essentially what you're doing is you're using mathematics that would normally have been something taught in, let's say, going in 6th or 7th grade, sometimes earlier, depending on where you're at, part of the U.S. region, all that fun stuff, right? So if you have a ball that costs X, because that's obviously what we're trying to solve for, we want to know how much the ball is going to cost, so that's an X value, and we have a bat that costs $1 or more, then essentially our starting equation is going to be X plus $1, right? Because whatever is the dollar extra is left over. Now, we know, based on the equation, that the bat and the ball equal X, which is essentially X plus 1, which is 1.1, right? But if we take that value, and let's say we look at it even further, if we take the 1.1, we know that 2x plus 1 equals 1.1. And if that's the case, we know that 2x equals 0.1. Now, if we divide the 0.1 by 2, it gives us 0.05, which is 5 cents or 5 pence. So, these basic calculations or equations that we were given earlier on really help us gather a better understanding of what we're or how we solve for these problems. Now, the third one you can kind of take for face value, and, this one you'd think, 47 days. Well, there's 48 days total. Well, think about this and the verbiage that they used, right? And this is why words and how we choose to use these words are extremely important. If the patch doubles in size each day going forward, it would have in size going backwards. So essentially, if at the end of 48 days it was full, that instance prior to that 48th day would have been half the size of the lake being full. So at that point, you have 47 days. And so, according to the MIT study, they surveyed 3,500 people on this, and 33% got all three. Now, when you look at that, you're like, wow, 33% of all people here in the U.S. got this question right, all three of them. That means that a good majority of the population didn't. How many did they miss? Some missed one, some missed all. It really puts things into perspective, and it kind of puts things into a clearer picture with kind of what we're doing here. We have all of these scenarios that are going on, and people don't want to learn, and when we're younger we don't want to learn, or we're taught whatever. But it's interesting because these simple questions determine our basic core foundation, right? Knowledge is simply that. We're building a knowledge base. Our brains are a library, a lexicon of words, and a library of books and resources that, as we collect them, we either put away to use later and can file them and find them, or put away and never use again. And of course, how we learn, how we associate things is important. But that's just, one of these key factors where I think that, having this information is just, it's awesome. You want your kids to learn, and you want them to understand, but if they have zero patience for the pursuit of knowledge, then they will have zero patience for the understanding of it. And I think that's where a lot of the adults that we interact with today are at. There's a zero tolerance and zero patience for what things are happening, and there's a lack of ability to explain how they feel or what they think in a way that isn't destructive or hurtful to others. You can express feeling, you can express your insights and your preferences without being mean, really. I mean, let's call it for what it is. Knowledge is something that should be shared. Just because somebody doesn't agree with you doesn't mean that they should hate you, or they do hate you. It means that they just don't agree with you and they don't agree with your views. But we need to understand that just because somebody's views are different, it's not necessarily bad. They're not evil people. They're not immoral. It's when you start to push that point of view towards others and force them into your thinking that creates this animosity and this hatred that everyone seems to just so willingly share. I mean, everything on the internet is bashing. Everything we see in the news is just pure hate. And yeah, people have views and points, but they don't want to hear yours being shoved down their throat. What you do in your own home is between you and your spouse, whoever that spouse may be. What you decide to do with your body should be between you and yourself when you're old enough to make that decision. You should never force children to do things that they don't want to do. It's just disgusting personally. I mean, as parents, we want to raise our children with the morals and beliefs that we have. And there's nothing wrong with that unless they're wrong. And whether your views are something that the world doesn't see, hate is hate. If anybody out there can tell me what the color of somebody's soul is, then I'd be very happy to hear that. Because if we were all colorblind or blind and couldn't see, then the idea of race wouldn't even be a faction. Whether or not somebody has the same-sex marriage, if they're happy, they're happy. Prior to the Greek and Roman Empire, we didn't really see that as an issue. It was once things started becoming a public rule of law that agendas like that started to get pushed. So, loving people and loving each other is almost in every aspect of knowledge's core foundation. If you love someone and you acknowledge that they exist, then you be open to learning the information they have. You're willing to take in the experiences that they've gained. You're willing to learn from the tools that they've learned from and pass that wisdom on. I mean, look at anybody in history. They all had problems. We have artists that cut off their ears. We had, individuals who are musicians who are going through depressions and were being preyed upon by people who took advantage of that. I mean, didn't matter what your talent was, didn't matter what you could do, but they still took the time to pass on the knowledge and to train others and educate others on what they thought and how they saw the world. And that really is all it is. It's an interpretation of how we see it and what we learn, interpreted by others and how they see it and learn. And so we have to make the best of the knowledge that we get. We have to make the best of the interactions and relationships that we have with others. And I think when we do, we'll be way better off. Hate is a word that we give definition that creates what it does. And it creates the actions that it does. And so, take a moment, learn about the people around you, learn some of the struggles that they go through, because I guarantee you they may be in a different environment, but the context is probably much similar than you might think. So, keep learning, keep exploring, and don't be afraid to believe and think. And, we'll see you next time. If you like the video, by all means, feel free to subscribe and hit the bell so you get reminded of any future videos that happen. We look forward to our next discussion. You guys take care.